A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is a fantasy drama set around 90 years before the events of Game of Thrones, and the first season went over incredibly well. I was lucky enough to get to see all 6 episodes ahead of time. Thank you, HBO. Love you. Keep it coming. So I knew the show was good. But even I was surprised by just how much people loved it. The episode scores on IMDb were so high it inspired a war with Breaking Bad fans. But I probably shouldn't have been surprised because the show has so much going for it. I think Sir Duncan the Tall is the single most likable character to ever appear in the Game of Thrones universe. He's kind, he's brave, and he's completely out of his depth, which makes him very easy to root for. He has fantastic chemistry with his squire Egg, and both of them are perfectly cast. Peter Claffey and Dexter Sol Ansel basically became stars overnight, which reminded me of the early days of Game of Thrones when actors like Kit Harington and Maisie Williams came out of nowhere to become fan favorites. The show has like a back-to-basics approach that works really well for it. We've gotten a lot of fantasy shows since Game of Thrones blew up in the 2010s, and most of them have been these big, sprawling epics with lots of characters and locations and complicated interlocking plots. So it was refreshing that Knight of the Seven Kingdoms was set in more or less one place with a small group of characters playing out a relatively low-stakes story. Sir Duncan is a newly minted knight who wants to make a name for himself by doing well in a tournament. And that's about it, at least at first. The show is lighter and funnier than Game of Thrones fans are used to, but there are still plenty of plot twists and GOT-style brutality. Dunk's Trial of Seven is one of the nastiest, most exciting battle sequences in the whole franchise, proving that the fate of the world doesn't have to be in the line for an action scene to hit hard. So the first season of Knight of the Seven Kingdoms was simple, powerful, funny, well cast, well made. No wonder people enjoyed it. But some of them liked it for other reasons. Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is proof TV can still be great if you ditch woke bullshit. Non-woke Game of Thrones show explodes in popularity. I highly recommend A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. No DEI, no woke shit, no feminine men. This is white culture. Yeah, there was a loud contingent of right-wing watchers, some of them pretty prominent public figures, who seemed to enjoy A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms mostly because it wasn't woke. I want to get into what these people were talking about, whether their claims hold up, and maybe try and figure out why some of these culture warrior types feel the need to claim ownership over media like this. Please beware spoilers on this episode of Psst, like and subscribe. Pass it on. So, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is based on the novella The Hedge Knight by author George R.R. Martin. Pictured here, not finishing The Winds of Winter. Martin closely consulted with showrunner Ira Parker during the making of the show, which sticks very close to the source text. Probably closer than anything in the franchise since the very first season of Game of Thrones. We're going to talk about whether or not the show leans one way or the other politically, so it's worth noting that Martin himself definitely leans left, at least in his personal life. He was a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War, he's gone on record many times as hating Donald Trump, and he thinks that LGBTQ+ people are people, which I know should be a given, but does still pass as a progressive position in much of the world.
Is there a purpose that I had for making the characters gay? Well, I've noticed that there are gay people in the world. So I thought I should put a few in my world too.
That said, Martin isn't the kind of author who likes to insert his own politics into his work. He's talked about being influenced by actual historical events, by history books, by other fantasy books, but in general, he thinks fantasy should be bigger than just an allegory for the present. As he said at the Oxford Writers' House in 2024, fantasy is about universal human truth, about love, life, faith, doubt, greed, lust, all those basic human things that are different but at the same time the same in the Middle Ages, or in 2024, or in ancient Rome. And those are the things I like to write about the most. But again, the man does lean left, so if any politics seep into his work unconsciously, it's probably going to be left-wing politics. And I do think it's pretty easy to sort of read A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms in a left-wing way. Let's try it now. Sir Duncan the Tall is born Dunk of Fleabottom, a homeless orphan living on the streets of King's Landing. That by itself makes the show unique, because in both Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, the other prequel show, we hang out almost exclusively with members of the upper class, the 1%, if you will, and if we do meet peasants, they've usually already been accepted into the ranks of the rich and powerful, or else are their secret children. But Dunk is just a normal, dirt-poor guy with no connections to speak of, and the main conflict in the show arises because he transgresses against the rigid class system in Westeros. Dunk protects fellow peasant Tanzel Tootal from a princeling named Aerion Targaryen, who attacks her after he gets offended by her puppet show. What's the matter, Aerion? Can't take a joke? The puppets don't have the right ideology? Anyway, Dunk is 100% right to defend Tanzel and smack Aerion around a little bit, but he's arrested anyway because Aerion is a member of the royal family and Dunk is a poor nobody who doesn't have enough institutional power to protect himself from the whims of rich assholes. So Dunk is butting up against a two-tiered justice system, where the rich have rights the poor don't.
No matter the cause, it is never wise to strike a king's grandson.
Would you not have done the same?
I might have. But I am a prince of the realm, not a hedge knight.
The only reason Aerion doesn't execute Dunk on the spot is because, through a miracle of circumstance, Egg reveals himself to also be a Targaryen princeling, and he has enough sway to at least prevent that. So Dunk is a victim of systemic injustice. That is, unfairness that results because governmental, economic, and cultural systems are designed in such a way that makes unfair outcomes inevitable, regardless of whether the individual people who work within them have good intentions. Systemic injustice is a huge talking point on the left, but prominent conservatives today basically deny that it exists. So that's one way the show kind of lines up with more left-wing ideas. Now, Dunk isn't the kind of intense left-wing dude who's like, overthrow the system, burn it all down. But he does have an idea how to make things a little bit better. Rather than accept an invitation to join the upper classes and train Egg in a real-life Targaryen castle, Dunk takes Egg with him on the road, where this silver spoon, dragonborn rich boy will sleep in ditches and eat like the Westeros equivalent of Spam.
I want some hot salt beef!
And hopefully that'll help him develop a little more character than his psycho brother Aerion or his alky brother Darren, and there will be one less rich jackass around to terrorize the peasantry. So, in our world, the gap between the rich and the poor has been getting wider for quite a while, and President Donald Trump looks like he wants to widen it further, what with him cutting taxes for the rich and going after unions. Who knows, maybe we'll get back to a medieval spread where most of us toil in the dirt, and a lucky few people get to live like, well, royalty. And under those circumstances, choosing to cross the class divide like Egg does, to leave behind a life of luxury to live like an ordinary person, is a huge act of transgression. The gap narrows just a little bit, and the show endorses it. That feels like a progressive message to me. This last part is a little squishy, but I also think A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms has something to say about immigrants. So, Tanzel Tootal is from the kingdom of Dorne, which until about 20 years before the events of the show is not a part of the Seven Kingdoms. It's only recently joined the fold and things are still settling. So while Tanzel is not technically an immigrant, Dorne is still a culture apart. Not to mention the only place in Westeros where there are a lot of people with darker complexions. So she's still something of a foreigner whenever she leaves. And in the show, she's portrayed as sympathetic and worthy of protection, which does stand out at a time when Trump and his lieutenants have basically made it their life's work to demonize immigrants and eject them from the United States. Okay, so I think I've made a reasonable-ish argument that A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms has a bit of a progressive bent, that it's at least a little bit woke. And mind you, it's just a reading. I don't think George R. R. Martin was thinking of any of this stuff when he wrote The Hedge Knight. I just think he wanted to tell a good story. But I'm just saying, that was not hard to do. Like, the raw material is there. Alright, so how do these right-wingers figure that the show is actually an anti-woke rallying cry? To give them the benefit of the doubt, I'm going to address the most reasonable arguments first, before I get to the frothing at the mouth, no girls allowed kind of stuff. One argument I saw pop up a bunch, and not just from right-wingers, is that A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms succeeds because it's not cynical or morally ambiguous, that it gives us characters who are good or bad in a way that recalls more traditional fantasy like The Lord of the Rings. The YouTuber The Critical Drinker, who analyzes media from an anti-woke perspective, basically took that tack in his video, Make Fantasy Heroic Again.
It's a show that feels weirdly optimistic. I mean, it's not to say that everything and everyone in it is good and virtuous, or that nothing bad ever happens to our heroes, but there's an underlying feeling that the show actually has a moral compass, that it knows the difference between good and evil, between hero and villain, and it's not ashamed or self-conscious about any of that.
And this is allegedly in contrast to a show like Game of Thrones, which was big on moral grayness, that was less about good and bad, and more about who could get and keep power.
What meaning and lessons were we ever supposed to take from Game of Thrones? That the world is a horrible, violent and cruel place where good and evil don't exist, and all that matters is what you can take from it?
Or there's the tweets from this guy, who writes to over 40,000 likes. For years, people told us that prestige TV like Game of Thrones had to be dark, morally gray, and cynical to make for good art. But the success of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms proves that is nonsense. Now, I agree with these guys that there does seem to be a bit of a vibe shift happening, that we're getting away from sort of cynical, gritty fantasy and into big Guy Hopecore. Apple announced that it's adapting the Stormlight Archive and the Mistborn series by author Brandon Sanderson, and his stuff is more straight ahead, like good guy versus ontological evil than anything George R.R. Martin has ever written. But I don't like how these critiques kind of frame this vibe shift as if the past 2 decades of bleak anti-hero TV were thrust upon us against our will. As if Game of Thrones wasn't a generational super hit and the natural big-budget follow-up to popular, challenging shows like The Sopranos, The Wire, Mad Men, and Breaking Bad. As if studios should have been making more optimistic content all along.
That maybe Hollywood is finally realizing that fantasy should be an escape from the hang-ups and tedium of real life instead of a boring reflection of it.
But this is just the latest trend in an industry built on trends. Once upon a time, westerns were the most popular movies around. Then it was musicals, then it was intimate prestige dramas, then it was big-budget franchise blockbusters. Remember when we got nothing but superhero movies for like 10 straight years? This shift to more uplifting popular entertainment is just another change. It's not better or worse. Also, I think these analyses sell both Game of Thrones and A Night of the Seven Kingdoms short. Like, this is the critical drinker's summation of Game of Thrones.
Morality, meaning and purpose were all sacrificed in favor of nihilistic subversion and smug deconstruction to be the cool kid on the block for a couple of years.
I know that the ending to Game of Thrones is widely hated, but it's hard to imagine how you could watch it and think it lacked any morality, meaning, and purpose. The show concludes with the world-ending White Walkers defeated and the promise of summer returning. It ends with the surviving characters abandoning genetic monarchy in favor of something slightly more democratic. Like, we can argue about whether it did any of that well, but there was hope at the end. Like, there was progress. It was all meant to have meant something. On the flip side, I don't think A Night of the Seven Kingdoms is as morally binary as these guys seem to. A character like Baelor Targaryen is definitely a good guy. He helps Dunk fight against Aeryn when no one else will. But the show makes a point to cast some doubt on his bravery.
Your prince fought for you against men sworn to protect him. He risked nothing.
And the gods don't favor a fraud.
Likewise, Aeryn is definitely a villain, but he's not, like, pure evil. Again, the show goes out of its way to tell us he's a product of his environment.
But Aeryn was quite the glad child once. He liked fishing.
That's why Dunk wants Egg to accompany him in the first place, so Egg doesn't end up like his brothers. And as for Dunk, he's as honest as they come, but it's implied that he may be lying about being a knight at all, and that's like the whole foundation of his identity. So far as George R.R. Martin stories go, the Tales of Dunk and Egg novellas are on the simpler side, like morally speaking. But they are still George R.R. Martin stories. Good men still die, and not all the characters are easily categorizable as heroes or villains. If future seasons remain true to the books, not to mention what we know of Dunk and Egg's life after the books, then things will get a little more complicated, and I'm all for it. Another argument I saw a lot was that A Night of the Seven Kingdoms is anti-woke because it celebrates masculinity. Heroic masculinity is back in the zeitgeist. And obviously, it's true that Dunk and Egg are men, granted, good catch. But there are lots of TV shows, now and always, where the main characters are men. That's never stopped being true. However, some of these people talk. Masculine virtues are making a welcome comeback. As if we ever stop making movies and TV shows about strong dudes trying to do the right thing. But despite that, there's like a sense of victimization and persecution running through a lot of these critiques, as though Hollywood has been depriving these people of what they want for years.
We're done with the morally grey protagonists that nobody really likes. We're done with the ironic mockery and the sneering postmodern criticisms of classic heroic archetypes.
Chivalry and honor codes are center stage here. No hint of feminism. Writes someone calling themselves Tyler Durden on the website Zero Hedge, where the article has hundreds of comments. It's hard to believe, but the focus of this series is the necessity and value of good men. I also see an attempt here to frame virtues that are pretty much universally respected and appreciated as anti-woke. How is being honorable at odds with feminism? Let's do a little thought experiment. So, in A Song of Ice and Fire lore, Sir Duncan the Tall is the distant ancestor of Brienne of Tarth, the brave female knight from Game of Thrones. So let's say that their places were switched, that Dunk is running around with Podrick Payne in Game of Thrones, and Brienne teams up with Egg in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Would Brienne's defense of Tansel be any less honorable than Dunk's? I don't really see how. Or what if Dunk was gay, and he was crushing on, Tony tall enough? Would him putting his life on the line in the Trial of Seven be any less brave? Again, not if you ask me, but I get the feeling that a lot of the anti-woke crowd would absolutely hate it. Slight tangent. Having said all that, I wouldn't want Dunk and Brienne to switch places, in part because I do think there's value in a character like Dunk providing a positive example for young men out there. Dunk isn't just strong and brave, he's kind and generous. He takes Egg under his wing when he thinks Egg is just a poor orphan with nowhere else to go. He protects innocent people from powerful bullies, even if it means putting himself at risk. We've heard a lot in the past few years about young men sort of drifting more towards the right, or about getting caught up in the manosphere online, where they can absorb some pretty pernicious ideas.
The woman! The woman!
What? We love everybody? No!
All cases die!
What have I done?
So yeah, I think Dunk sets a really good example for young men. And I think pretty much anybody of any political stripe would agree. Okay, tangent over. Looking at a lot of these critiques, you get the idea that a lot of these people are obsessed with race, gender, and sexual orientation, with identity politics. And that's kind of funny, since that's what many of them accuse folks on the left of doing, but I don't know how else to read this stuff. It's like a lot of them only see value in Dunk's heroism and decency because he's straight, white, and male, and that the presence of women, racial minorities, or anyone from the LGBTQ community somehow undermines that. The comment section under that Zero Hedge article is full of people bothered that Tansel has dark skin, or scared that the show will be ruined after they add someone diverse to the cast and crew in future seasons. Which, by the way, doesn't make much sense because half the episodes in the first season were directed by a woman, and there was plenty of diversity on the writing staff. Or how about this tweet, where the guy names the show Woke Crap, apparently because he sees a black woman with no lines in the background of one shot. Even the Critical Drinker, who I think makes some coherent points about how the show is less cynical than the fantasy series that preceded it, can't help himself from implying that the real problem is women and minorities.
We're done with the girl bosses and the diversity quotas and the alphabet soup of sexualities that have to get crammed into absolutely everything.
And then, of course, there's the tweet from prominent right-wing influencer Jack Posobiec, who's spoken at CPAC and who goes on the news and who has a podcast and the whole 9 yards. This is white culture, he writes, where this is the scene from episode 4 where Baelor decides to fight with Sir Duncan during the Trial of Seven.
I will take Sir Duncan's side.
What about one guy choosing to help another guy is white culture? It's such a weird thing to say. Obviously, anybody of any race can be heroic and honorable and brave like Baelor is being here. Also, just a little aside for you, in the lore, Baelor Targaryen's mother is Dornish. So they could have cast a darker-skinned actor in the part without breaking canon. And I wish they had. It would have scrambled these people's brains. I'm struck by how, flat a lot of these critiques feel. Not to pat myself on the back too hard, but I thought my little left-wing breakdown of the show earlier in the video was decently detailed. I talked about class, I used SAT words like systemic, I dug into Westerosi history. But for a lot of these anti-woke people, it really does seem to boil down to if straight, white, and male, then non-woke and good, and if anything else, then woke and bad. And that just seems like such a boring, binary way to approach media. Happily, most people do not think like this. We don't have detailed audience breakdowns for A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms yet, but if the audience was anything like it was for Game of Thrones, then it cuts across gender, racial, and political lines. Most people can empathize with fictional characters who aren't exactly like them. In fact, they kind of have to. That's how fiction works. The first TV hero I remember really getting into when I was a kid was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Now, she's a woman and I'm not, but she was brave and strong and funny and put herself in harm's way to protect others. She and Dunk are cut from the same cloth there. And I didn't find it hard to enjoy her story because it's a good one. All most people want when they watch a movie or TV show is a good story. And A Night of the Seven Kingdoms tells a good story and tells it well. That's why I think it's been a success. But the anti-woke brigade is out here insisting that the show's great ratings are all thanks to the fact that the hero is straight, white, and male. Why are they like this?
What business is that of yours?
So in the late 2010s, conservative culture warriors had a catchphrase you heard a lot online. Go woke, go broke. Which basically meant that if a TV show or a movie was too woke, and again, that basically meant that it had too many women and minorities in it, then it wouldn't be successful. You don't hear this phrase much anymore, probably because it was proven wrong so often that it started to become embarrassing. Like, imagine saying go woke, go broke with a straight face in a world where heated rivalry was the breakout show of 2025. The highest grossing Hollywood movie of last year, with a haul of almost $2 billion, was Zootopia 2, about a city where all kinds of different animals live together, and the whole story is about how one group of them have been unfairly maligned, and in the end they're readmitted to society, and everyone learns how wrong they were to exclude them. Obviously, most people have no problem watching movies and TV shows with woke themes. They have no problem watching non-white people on screen. In fact, movies with diverse casts tend to do really good business. And the reverse of go woke, go broke, I guess go non-woke, get money, I see what that didn't catch on, is not true either. Literally, while A Night of the Seven Kingdoms was airing on HBO, a whole other fantasy series was rolling out over on Daily Wire Plus. The Pendragon Cycle, Rise of the Merlin, which, I hate that title. Rise of the Merlin. The Merlin? That's not how names work. Anyway, the show is a take on the King Arthur legend, and it seems to have everything that the anti-woke crowd says they want. There's not a person of color in sight, and the Daily Wire's whole thing as an outlet is producing content made for conservative audiences. There's even a prominent right-wing influencer in the cast. And yet no one was talking about this series, probably because it wasn't very good. Instead, the anti-woke crowd were all talking about how A Night of the Seven Kingdoms is based and awesome because of its lack of diversity. It reads like insecurity to me, like they're so happy that they finally found a high-quality show that checks at least some of their boxes. They feel the need to claim it as their own, even if their arguments are kind of shallow and nonsensical. I also think that a lot of these people have made right-wing politics a core part of their identity, to the point where it's almost impossible for them to watch a TV show without projecting those politics onto it. It's kind of sad if you think about it. Like, before Jack Posobiec blew up, he literally ran a Game of Thrones blog. He has met George R.R. Martin in person. Clearly, he's a fan, and I'm not surprised he enjoyed Night of the Seven Kingdoms. But it's almost like enjoying it isn't enough for him. He has to convince himself that the show is on his side, that it's actually about white culture. Also, I'm sure he knows that saying something inflammatory will get engagement, so that matters too. But I don't think you can grift for this long without starting to believe it. HBO is already working on the second season of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which should be out sometime next year. It's based on the second of Martin's Duncan Egg novellas, The Sworn Sword, which is every bit as good as the first, so my hopes are high. But Season 2 will have prominent supporting roles for a woman and a black man, so I don't know how the anti-woke crowd will take it. Will they not tune in? Will they break their brains trying to justify how it's still okay to watch? Or maybe some of them will realize that this woke versus anti-woke thing is all in their heads, and that they're allowed to enjoy a show just because it's well-made and entertaining and has characters they care about. Like a normal person.